Okay, today we're going to multiply and divide by 5. We're going to start with multiplication here. So the rule works on if you multiply a number by 5, it is mathematically, it is the exact same thing as first dividing by 2 and then multiplying by 10. This is because 10 divided by 2 is 5. So for most people, dividing by 2 is something they can do in their head. It is mental math. It's easier just to half a number, and then multiplying by 10 is very straightforward because we work in a base 10 number system. So for example, say you had, let's start with an easy one, 5 times 42. So you take 42 here, and you divide it by 2. That gives you 21, and then you multiply it by 10, and that gives you 210. So 5 times 42 equals 210. So we're going to try some more here. So you have 88. You take 88 and you cut it in half, which is 44. And then you multiply 44 by 10, and that gives you 440. So here you take 44, and just like always, you cut it in half, you get 22. Then you multiply 22 by 10, and that gives you 220. Now here, we have some extraneous zeros and a decimal that we don't need to worry about. So you can see my video number 1 for tricks with decimals and numbers with zeros to the right here. But really, essentially, we are just multiplying 5 by 79. At the end, we can decide where the decimal goes. So the rule is you take 79 and you divide it by 2. It's an odd number, so it's a 0.5. It's a half. You get 39.5. And then you multiply that by 10, and you get 395. Now we're going to look, does this answer make sense? Well, 500 times, this is like 79% of 500. Yes, it does make sense, 395. Do this one here, just like before, we're going to remove the decimal. So really, this is just 5 times 122. And now we're going to do our multiplication trick. We take this number, we divide it by 2, that gives us 61, and then we can multiply it by 10, and we're at 610. But since we took out decimals, we need to look at where it goes. So this is 0.5 is a half. A half of 12 is 6. So a half of 12.2 is going to be slightly more than 6. So I know the decimal must go here. We have the number 6.1. So I don't really need that last zero. So that is my final answer. So now let's take a look at division, dividing. So when you divide by 5, because it's an inverse operation from multiplication, instead of dividing by 2, you multiply by 2. You double the number instead of half the number, and then you divide by 10. So again, you just, since it's inverse, you're inversing the operations there. Division becomes multiplication and vice versa. So if you have, let's try a pretty straightforward one, say 205 divided by 5. So first step is you multiply this by 2, that's 410, and then you divide it by 10, and that equals 41. Okay, let's do some more examples. Okay, so we're dividing by 5, so we take this number, instead of having it, we double it. If you double it, you get 244, and then instead of multiplying by 10, you divide by 10, so that becomes 24.4. So we're going to take 230, and we double it, 460, and then you divide by 10, and that's just going to be 46. There you go. So this one has a decimal. So again, I always encourage people, ignore the decimal when you actually do the calculation and then figure out where it goes afterwards. So we're really, essentially, we're dividing 444 by 5. So just like always, we're going to take this number, we're going to double it. So that's 888. And then we're going to divide by 10. And that becomes 88.8. But before we put that point there, let's say a good tip for this trick. If you're dealing with decimals, I wouldn't really even worry about that dividing by 10. I'd write the number you get when you double the number, so 888, and then just estimate where the decimal goes. So 44 divided by 5. If you estimate this, well, 40 divided by 5 is 8. So you know 44.4 divided by 5, it's going to be a little bit bigger than 8, but less than 9. So you know the decimal has to go here. It can't be 88. So it's 8.88, final answer. Okay, last one here. So the decimals, we're going to ignore it and do 46 divided by 5. So all you do is you take 46 and you double it. That becomes 92. So before I divide it by 10, I'm just going to estimate where the decimal goes. Because remember, dividing or multiplying by 10, all it does is kind of change the location of the decimal. So this number is less than 5. So for a number less than 5 divided by 5 is going to be less than 1. So this is less than 1. It's got to be 0.92. So just to recap, the rule for multiplying by 5, you multiply by 2, and then you divide by 5. And that will always give you a correct answer. Now the rule for dividing by 5, instead of multiplying by 2, you divide by 2, and then you multiply by 10. And because multiplying and dividing by 10 is extremely straightforward, multiplying and dividing by 5 really comes down to, can you half a number and double a number? It's multiplying by 2 and dividing by 2. It's as simple as that. Try some on your own. Use your calculator, check your work, use decimals, challenge yourself. That's it.